On today's episode of Let's Talk Dog Business, we're joined by Kat West, who talks about her experiences of living with autism and working as a dog trainer.
Hi, Kat. Thanks ever so much for joining us on today's podcast episode. How are you?
I'm very well, yeah. The sun is shining here in Scotland, so that makes it all the better.
Amazing. It's quite an unusual thing to hear that the sun is shining in Scotland.
Well, anywhere at the moment, to be honest.
We shouldn't be too down on the Scottish weather. We get some good weather up here.
Wow. I'm looking forward to this episode because this is a little bit, I suppose, it's a topic that we've been really interested in going into having a chat about. So for context for the listeners, you have been working with us in a one-to-one capacity on business coaching. And then it came to light in our earlier sessions that you've been diagnosed with autism. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yep. And with that diagnosis of autism and then it falling under this neurodiverse umbrella where we're finding a lot of entrepreneurs in general have this ADHD and everything like that. There's obviously been some challenges and stuff that have been thrown up along the way. We thought it'd be a really cool opportunity to actually just explore this on the podcast because there's so many people that we know will relate to feeling some of the things that you found on your journey, and just wanted to explore it and for you to share a little bit about that if you can.
Yeah, I mean, where do you want me to start? Do you want a little intro to me?
I think if you give us a little bit of background, give everybody a little bit of background about what it is you do, and and then we'll start from there.
Okay, so I've had a very varied history, which again I think goes along with the neurodiversity to a level. But currently working as a dog trainer, full-time job. It's not a side gig; it's my full-time job. Have been for about 4 years-ish, I suppose. Got into it in exactly the same way that most people do, with a problem dog that you had to become a dog trainer for. I'm kind of a little bit working alongside another dog trainer. So that's me. I'm up here in the Scottish borders, and I just do, I just do general training. I teach scent work as well, but I'm a general dog trainer. I'm not like a particular specialist in any way. I've got strengths and stuff.
Although you do have a passion for a certain type of dog.
Yeah, I am a terrier person. I'm definitely a terrier person, which comes from having terriers, I guess. But I think that's all. It all circles around. I ended up with terriers because I like terriers, and I am a terrier person, and that's going forward, that's the plan, is to specialise a bit more. But and the neurodiverse half of me, well, I've always been autistic, obviously, because it's a genetic thing that you're born with. But I was diagnosed 2-3 years ago now. I think I come to it. Fly around my face. I've come to it the same way a lot of people do when they're late diagnosed. Because their kids get diagnosed. So my son was highlighted at school, that they thought he might be autistic. And I went off on this big, what I now know to be like an autistic deep dive into autism, because I was like, I need to know everything about autism, because if my son's autistic, I must, I need to know everything about it. And how's it going to affect him and how do I deal with it and all this kind of stuff. And then I sort of just went, well, hang on, all of this stuff that I'm researching here, this, none of this is weird. I do all of these things, So I think a lot of, particularly women, because we tend to get missed, I think, in school and stuff, because we mask very well and we just bumble along being, we don't make a fuss, we don't cause problems. It's a bit of a stereotype, but like young boys tend to, as young girls, we tend not to cause so many problems at school. So we just bumble along and don't get diagnosed. And plus, I don't think in the late 80s and the early 90s when I was at school, it wasn't a thing anyway. Nobody was really highlighting it. So there's quite a lot of women, I think, that are coming to it now because their kids of our age, because their kids are getting, diagnosed. So, but it explains a lot about my life. You sort of look back and you go, oh yeah, I see all
What kind of things were cropping up then that made you think, oh, this is a bit like me, or this isn't not normal?
So I guess the things that the main, it's hard really because it's difficult. All I can do is speak about my experience of it, and how it affects, how it affects me, I guess. And I try not to think of it as things that aren't normal. I mean, it's really good. It's a hard thing to frame, especially when it's you, because you don't want to sit and think to yourself, oh, I'm not normal. It's things that I try and frame it, or I try and think of it as differences, like, and to use a kind of, and here's a dog training analogy for you. It's like a breed difference. It's like looking at a border collie and a terrier and going, okay, well, this border collie does this because their brain's wired that way, and this terrier does this because their brain's wired that way. And there's no good me trying to approach them in the same way.
Yeah.
So I guess I tried to think about it like that.
I like that.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, it has that, like it has that analogy. I guess the main thing for me is I've got a lot of sensory stuff, which I've spent a lot of time masking. So, like, I'm not great with a lot of loud noise. Like, I find, and you sort of, you don't realize until someone points out to you how much that takes out of you. Like, if I'm in a lot of loud noise for a long period of time, I'm extremely tired for no reason, and I might just think, oh, I'm just tired because it's been a busy day. But it isn't. I could literally sit still all day long in a room that's incredibly noisy. So let's talk about like typical social situations, like going to a pub, or like kids soft play is one of the classics as a parent. Sitting in the side of kids soft plays and kids parties and all that kind of stuff. That tires me out a lot. Like that takes a lot out of me. And there's almost a physical pain with some of it, like the noise of it, like because you're masking it, because you're sat there not showing that, you're sort of just sat there going, oh God, that's terrible. But yet to the outside, you don't look like there's anything going on. It takes a lot out of you. So there's things like that, I suppose, which I guess I never really realised that other people weren't experiencing that. I just thought everybody was like that. Oh, everybody hates loud noise. Like I didn't think that was an issue.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Like until you sort of go, oh God, I actually like this stuff. But like, I'm very sensitive to light. I think the statistic, and I don't know if this is 100% true, but the statistic is like 40% extra sensory information. So the average neurodiverse person takes in 40% more of what's going on around them than like a neurotypical person would. So like I hear things like one of the stereotypes is that you hear electricity, and I do hear electricity. Like everything in my kitchen is switched off at the wall. I boil the kettle and then I switch it off at the wall, because when I go into the kitchen I can hear it buzzing if I don't do that. Like stuff that other people, as you're picking up like this stuff, and that in itself is just more tiring because there's nothing you can do about it. You're just getting hit by all of this stuff.
Yeah, I was going to say, actually, it sounds really exhausting.
Yeah, and and I don't think you realise until you realise, which it sounds so weird. Now looking back on it now, I'm like, why did that never make sense to me? But now it's been pointed out to me, like, oh, I see. And there's like this revelation of like, when you say things, other people think you're a bit mad. You say things like, well, I need to switch the kettle off at the wall because I can. And people are like, don't be. And people will literally say to you, especially when you're a kid, don't be ridiculous. Of course you can't hear the kettle. And I'm like, no, I can. But people will say to you, no, you can't. So you spend like your entire life getting told that the things that to you seem to be completely like, which are there, that aren't right. Of course you can't hear the kettle. Of course you can't hear those birds fly. Of course you can't see that thing over there. Like, don't be ridiculous. Nobody can do that.
And I suppose that comes down to communication, doesn't it? Because I'm guessing now the world is more aware that the conversations might be had and the signs are there to recognise. So do you think, like, let's look at your son's diagnosis there. What led to that?
I think just the awareness of school that he was having some issues with concentration. He's got autism and ADHD, so he's got both, bless him. His dad's got ADHD, so he got a double whammy and ended up with both of them. He was just struggling, and he has and again, this is a stereotype, but it's usually relatively true. Like most autistic and ADHD neurodiverse people, has a generally higher IQ. Like, so he's smart, like super smart, but he was struggling with doing things like reading and writing and stuff like that. And I think the school, because they're so much more aware of it now, are like, where he would have previously been labelled a naughty or lazy kid, like he's lazy, he's not learning, he's not this, that, and the other. They say, well, actually, it's because of the environment that he's in. I mean, you've got like kids and stuff, and you go into a primary school, and it's like an onslaught of stuff. There's pictures all over the wall. There's kids screaming in the classroom. There's stuff everywhere. And when you're like taking in 40% more of that information, like I go in for parents' evening and stuff like that, and I walk out and there's like this relief of leaving the place. You're like, God, there's just too much in there. Like it's too busy. So it was basically that he was struggling with just getting emotionally overloaded because of it. So he's getting onslaughted by all this extra information, and then he would have meltdowns and run out of school because he just couldn't handle the fact that, you know, he was getting all of this stuff thrown at him. You know, at the same time, a teacher saying, "Stay there, sit still, learn this thing." You know, and he hasn't learned those, because it's a learned skill as a neurodiverse person to be able to deal with all that stuff. You know, it's masking. You learn to kind of like sit there and cope with it. You know, and that takes up a lot of energy and a lot of energy. I suppose energy is the right. It just takes a lot out of you. So I guess and at that age, like when he was diagnosed a couple of years ago, it's you're too young to deal with that. You know, you don't have that the control over yourself. So he would do things like run out of school. I get phone calls, you know, we're chasing him down the street.
Yeah, and I guess, you know, when it comes to that sensory overload, I think there's a sliding scale with that. And I'm not autistic. I've not been diagnosed with anything, but I can really struggle with, and I guess a lot of people are going to say the same and agree with this. You know, when you go to a big city and it's just so loud and there's so much going on and there's stuff everywhere and advertising everywhere and everyone's trying to get your attention in some way. I really struggle with that. Like for someone to live in a city, I'm like, how do you do that? Because I love it. I love the buzz. I love the whole like, yeah, this is great for a day out. And then literally a couple of hours in, I'm like, I'm done with this. I don't know how people do it.
So the difference between being neurotypical and that being an experience as a neurotypical person, being like, you go to the city, you spend a couple of hours, it's a bit overwhelming, and you come home. So being neurodiverse is like doing that every day.
Every single day. Right.
That's stepping out of the door and it being that overwhelming, just stepping out of your own front door. So I like people that like neurodiverse people that live in the city on top of that. Like, good luck to them.
How do they do it?
Yeah, so that's the difference, I think. And it's easy to get, it's easy when you speak to people about it. They'll do exactly what you just did and they'll go, oh, I understand. Yes, when I know what you mean. It's very loud at the kids' soft play, isn't it? It's like, it's the difference between being neurotypical and those things being like experiences that happen to you occasionally and don't really have a massive effect on your life. You know, you have a busy day, it was a bit loud. The next day, that's fine. You know, you're back to normal again and you cope. That stuff builds up on you over time, you know, because it's every single day just in what is basically a normal environment, you know.
And do you have certain ways that you deal with that then? Had your son got any kind of, you know, has anybody gone through ways of coping with it and what you can do to help it?
Sure. If you think it's a bit like, it's this stress bucket analogy that, you know, you use it with dog training as well, don't you? You know, like the dog has a stress bucket and it's the same. I think I spend a lot of time by myself, and it's not like, and again, you know, for years you get told if you're struggling with something, oh, go and join a club or go and do a thing, get yourself out there. You know, like the typical advice is to go and get involved in things and do if you're getting a bit stressed or depressed or all those kind of things. Whereas the reality is, not for every neurodiverse person, but for me specifically, you know, like, and it's more of an autism thing, is that what I actually need is the opposite. I need to close the door and just shut everything out for a couple of hours. And I used to, before I was diagnosed, I think, go through cycles of trying to cope, and then I would have a massive blowout because I'd be coping, and then I'd end up having to like just having a meltdown and shutting myself away for weeks on end. Not to the extreme of like not getting out of bed, but it gets like that for some people. But I would, you know, like wouldn't go anywhere, do anything. Whereas now, because I know about it and I'm aware of it, I just do that on a daily basis. You know, like, so when we first spoke about business stuff, I was like, I have a hard and fast rule that I don't do more than 3 hours face to face with people every day. Like, it's just not happening. I'm not doing it because I can do it. I could probably do it for 6, 10, 8 months on end, probably. But at some point, that's going to backfire on me. Like, I only have 3 hours a day to talk to people. I only have 3 hours a day because the communication piece is so much harder. You don't pick up on people's signals, and I have to put this face on and make sure I don't offend people, because if I just talk like myself, it's easy to offend people because you're very direct and very blunt. It's there's loads of stuff that goes on, but that's my main coping strategy, to be fair, is just to make sure that all the things that I know are going to overload me, I manage it on a day-to-day basis rather than on like a big basis, so that I basically don't end up in that meltdown state.
Yeah. Sure. There's two arms my brain's thinking at the moment and going, I could see how that could potentially be a superpower from a dog trainer's point of view, because you can understand a lot more. But then also I can see how it can be incredibly overwhelming, because as a dog trainer, you're a business owner as well, typically. All that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, bringing it back to dog training, it's why I think there's so many neurodiverse people who have a connection with dogs and a connection with not even necessarily dog training, but just dogs as a whole. Although I'm not a professional, I can't go around diagnosing people, but you go around and you meet people and you sort of go, oh, I don't know if they know they're neurodiverse, but they are, because you can see it and you know what's going on. And dog people as a whole, I think, tend, lean towards it. If it's 20% of neurodiversity across the population as a whole, then that's got to be like 80-90% of what I would call like proper dog people. Not necessarily just pet owners, but like people who get into dog sports, because dogs don't require any masking. They don't require any emotional stretch. They don't give you any information you don't need. They take you as at face value. You don't, so all that relationship that you have with them is it's completely stress-free, because you don't have to put on a face. You don't have to, like mask or do any of this stuff. They're just a dog, and they just tell you, like, oh, the dog didn't like it when I did that, or the dog. It's such a straightforward communication, So I think loads of people who struggle with communicating with other humans and being in those places end up with animals, because you don't want to be completely on your own, but you get from animals what you don't get from people. So I think it's and it has all that thing about loads of information and stuff, and that's the other autistic things. Gathering all of the information about things, and you can do that with dogs. There's so much to learn.
There is so much to learn. It's never ending, isn't it?
Yeah.
So how have you found then? Because again, this is where I find it really fascinating, because like we were just saying, I can see the polar opposites of how amazing and how, I don't even know if terrifying is the right word, but how challenging it can be. Because as we know, like working with dogs, you don't get to just work with the dogs, do you? They come with people attached to them.
Totally, yeah. So it's a weird thing to go through life, to have both your greatest strength and your greatest weakness almost be the same thing. And I think it's where I'm going to get a terrier invade here. You coming out of the way? Why you end up doing a lot in work situations and not in social situations, because you're joining in. Because don't vomit. She's not very well. She keeps vomiting.
Oh no!
Just don't vomit on the podcast. That would be bad. So in a work situation, a lot of my qualities are really well received, right? Full of knowledge on the thing, very well received in a work situation. Very direct, very blunt, very well received in most work situations. Happy to speak your mind, very well received in most work situations. What else? Like hardworking, hierarchy, all that stuff goes really well in a work situation. When I, do a dog thing, and I've got my dog clients in front of me, and I spout, all this in-depth knowledge about dogs, everyone goes, oh, wow, brilliant. She's a great dog trainer. Look at all this knowledge she has, da, da, da. When I go into a social situation and start doing that, because that's just who I am. I'm not switching it on for work. If I go into a social situation, somebody asks me a question and I give them all of the information about that question, all of a sudden I'm weird. You know, and you're like, but I'm just doing what I do everywhere. You know, you asked me a question and I gave you an answer. So it's that like, it's odd how you can be. And so you end up doing, I think, you end up as a neurodiverse person doing things like socially that are like that. So like dog sports, stuff, you know, don't tend to go out into just social situations. It's social situations that are within a structure of something, because you can do that. You know, like you can go to the, you know, like you see it when you go places. I don't do agility, but you see it in agility. Like you see all of these people stood around the edge of the ring, like in-depth talking about the tiniest little thing of every, like, oh, that dog just missed that turn by a little bit, and if she'd just been half an inch that way when she gave that command, that's neurodiverse people in a social situation. Whereas, you know what I mean? Like, because they're talking about the thing that they're very, very passionate about, which is great. But if you then take that person out of there and put them in a pub with a load of people they've never met, then they are the really weird dog geek that everybody shuns. And like, don't talk to her. The only thing she's got to talk about is dog agility.
Yeah. And would you say it's including like all the nuances about that piece of knowledge they've got? Yeah.
Yeah. It's the in-depth, the autistic and ADHD, but it's that desire to deep dive into something to the point of, like, people would say you're obsessed. You know, God, you're obsessed about this. And again, that is when you're growing up and when you're doing a thing, people think of that as a negative thing. You know, like everything's negative. It's like, well, you're obsessed with that thing. And like, well, you could say, well, actually, you're extremely knowledgeable. Your depth of knowledge on that thing is amazing. But that's not what people say to you. They say to you, you're obsessed. Why are you so obsessed with that thing? Why can't you, you know, relax and go to the pub like everybody else? And you're like, I don't want to. The only thing I care about is this thing, and I want to do it all of the time.
Mm. When it comes to your clients then, so what you were saying earlier about like your geekiness and all of that information that you're really passionate about and you're talking to your clients, has that ever been, do you find that's challenging because your passion isn't the same, like their passion isn't the same as your passion? So does it ever get lost on people, or do they kind of struggle to receive it in a way? And does that affect then your relationship with a client?
Yeah, I know what you mean. Like, so yeah, if I had just an ordinary pet owner in front of me and I started going into the nuances of dog training, I think the difference is, for me personally, is that I think now at the age that I'm at, I've got enough life experience to moderate myself. But I can see how I can look back on myself as a 20-year-old and see that I didn't have that, you know, like, so it hasn't affected me in my dog training career because I'm good now. I know, like, I'm simulated. Like, I know, I can see it. It's learned. It's a skill that I've learned over the years. It's not something that comes naturally to me. Like, I don't know when. I can't always tell if I'm talking to somebody whether they are wanting to listen to me or not. Like, I'm talking. Are you wanting to listen to me or not? And I can't read that. You know, which I think is a thing that people naturally can read. Neurotypical people, they read each other. They know when to stop, when to talk. See that? I can't read that. It's all very learned. You know, like, I've just learned it all over the years. And when I was 20 or, you know, younger, I definitely didn't have that skill set. So I can see how somebody who would come into dog training as a younger person who was neurodiverse could struggle, because they would end up being so focused on the fact that, and you see this in dog trainers everywhere, I think, they get really upset at their clients for not wanting to know the information or not being as interested, as in depth as that, like, as they are. Whereas they don't get that in other professions. Like, a plumber doesn't come in, the plumber doesn't care whether you know how to fix your plumbing. Like, if they're not interested, they just fix it for you and out they go. I think because dog trainers are so many of them, I think, are neurodiverse, that they get really upset with their clients because they're like, I'm giving them all this information and I'm telling them all this stuff, and the client isn't doing it. They're not taking it on board. I think now, the age that I'm at, that's fine. I can deal with that now, because I can now look at somebody and go, they're not interested in all of this shit that I know. I just need to give them the bits that are important, and that's fine. And I can let it go now. But that's years of experience, not natural like, you know, like a natural skill, if that makes sense.
So what would you say to, like, would you have advice for somebody that's just coming into the industry then, and they are neurodiverse and they're struggling with that exact thing that you've just talked about there? Would you have any words of wisdom for them?
I think set your own boundaries. So one of the things is finding, I mean, it goes for business anyway, doesn't it? But finding those clients who are also interested, you know, like, so the quicker you can get into being a specialist in something, I think the better, because and this is harsh in a way, but the quicker you can get away from what I call like pet dog owners, the better. Like, so people who just want you to just come in and just make the dog walk on a loose lead and just make the dog do whatever. And they're not really interested in all that info. The quicker you get into teaching something like a sport or whatever, where you can then go really in depth, because people come to you for scent work and they want to know that stuff because they've come for scent work, whether they're neurodiverse or neurotypical, it doesn't matter. It's perfectly acceptable within that situation, isn't it, to be super, super knowledgeable on it. So it's fine. Yeah, that's what I would say. And I would say just set your own boundaries about the clients that you take on, that you don't take on. But until you're diagnosed, it's hard, because until you're diagnosed, you can't look at yourself from the outside in and see it. Like, I can look at myself now from the outside in and go, right, that's why I'm doing that. Now I have this label, and that's why I'm doing that. And that's why that person isn't. And I can understand that now, whereas I couldn't, I would have said. Even 5 years ago, I didn't understand it. So, like, as an autistic person, you see patterns and you see detail that other people don't see, right? And again, why we're really good with dogs, because we spot the patterns, we see the detail, we see what the dog's doing, and we get those little nuances of their behaviour. And I can very quickly, you know, like, say to somebody, the dog's doing this because of this. And you know how when you're training a dog and you get that, there's those precursor behaviours, isn't there, to something? You're like, so the dog's about to react, and you see it, you see the ear, you see the thing, you see the tense of the muscle, you see all that stuff. And I used to get really frustrated with people for not seeing it, because I didn't understand that they just couldn't see it. Does that make sense? So I'd just be like, this person's stupid.
Yeah. We've all thought it, haven't we?
Yeah, we've all thought it.
You're like, why? And then you realise that actually that 40% worth of information that I'm taking in, that's what's giving me that. It's not that person that I'm working with is stupid. They're not stupid. They're just not getting that extra bit of sensory information that I'm getting. So it gives you like this whole ability to just take a breath and not get stressed with people. Because I'd be like, I would think, they're not trying. Try harder. I can see it. Why can't you see it? You know, and then you'd be like, actually, they just need to catch it. They just need more time, because they haven't got that extra 40% of information that I've got. So, I mean, they have the benefit of not having it as well, because I've got to process it, which makes it which is why I get tired and all that kind of stuff real quick. But they're not getting it. So what, you know, like, and I can now be very understanding and be like, it's fine. And the trouble is, it sounds so, if you explain that to people, to neurotypical people, it's you sound so conceited and big-headed. Like, to have that conversation with someone, to tell them, well, I'm getting 40% of information that you're not. People immediately get on the back foot and start going, well, what do you think? You're some sort of smart ass that's better than me? And you're like, it's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm trying to say. It's just like a total difference. You know, when you sit and talk with neurodiverse people, because I've now got more friends that, you know, have kind of much more openly neurodiverse, and you sit and you say, I can say this to you because I know you're not going to take this the wrong way. You know, but I couldn't say that to somebody who wasn't in this world, because they would just be like, you know, it's like everything, you know, everything in life that gets that's been what's the word, misunderstood over time.
Yeah,
so the same thing. We're just going through that process. You know, women weren't a couple of 100 years ago. Women weren't intelligent enough to read, were we? You know,
this is true. Yes.
Yeah.
How dare you?
Yeah, we're just going through that same process with this that we've been through with so many other things, I think. So yeah. That.
What are your thoughts on then? So because you've gone through it with your son and yourself with more of the official diagnosis.
Yeah.
Because I have even people in my close friends and family circle that'll go, oh, I've got ADHD. But I don't officially know I've got ADHD, but I've kind of like self-diagnosed. And I feel like that is quite prevalent at the moment. And I think it is, I hear it a lot in entrepreneurial world as well. But again, I think it does kind of lend itself to people that are bucking the norm and going against the trend. And because your brains do naturally think a little bit differently. Whether it is officially a diagnosis of ADHD, I don't know. I don't know enough information about it, being completely honest.
Yeah. So I think, like anything, it's harmless until it's not. So, like, we all can flippantly say, you know, like when you get a bit obsessed with something, oh God, I'm getting all OCD over this, right? And it's a flippant comment that somebody who actually had OCD could get really upset about, right? And you probably wouldn't do it in front of somebody that actually had OCD. It's just a flippant comment. And I think a lot of people will say that about things like ADHD and autism. They'll just make a flippant comment that, you know, like, oh God, I got super distracted by this thing today. I was all ADHD. You know, and that's fine. I don't see it's not an issue. It's not an issue any more than me making a flippant comment about anything I might make a flippant comment is.
Yeah.
And then there's the people who genuinely, you know, like do self-diagnose. And again, that's fantastic, because if you self-diagnose as being autistic, if it helps you, then it's good. Even if you technically wouldn't even if you went to a psychiatrist and you went through the process and you didn't get an autism diagnosis, if the fact that you've diagnosed yourself as autistic helps you and improves your life, then do it. Go for it. Why? You're not doing anybody any harm. I don't feel particularly. I mean, I know some people might feel differently, but I don't feel that there's nothing more that's no more or less valid than me saying I've got, you know, I'm feeling tired today or whatever. It's just me giving a name to something, and if it improves my life and it helps me to understand myself a little bit better, then fine. You know, like having the piece of paper for me was more about my son than anything else. Because when he got the piece of paper and I'd researched it, I didn't need the piece of paper. I knew, you know, I was like, oh well, this is obvious to me now. You know, it's obvious. I look through my family now and I can see it. You know, none of the older generation of my family have got diagnosis, because they're of the generation before us where it's even more odd to have a diagnosis. But I can look at them all and go, yep, tick, yep. Go back to the generations of my family and you can spot them, you know, aunts, uncles, and go, oh yeah, definitely. 100%. They're all autistic. That's where it's come from. It's genetic. I feel like I've gone off on a tangent now. But yeah, so yeah, I don't think it matters, is the honest truth. Did I just answer?
Back to the label, right? So let's go back to the labeling again. Would you say that sometimes if someone is labeled with something, it can actually have the opposite effect? So it can be a positive, like you've just said there, it can be a positive. Do you feel sometimes it holds people back if they've got that label and it stops them from doing something that they are maybe not willing, not willing, that's not the right word, but they're struggling to push past because of that label and it's defining them?
Yeah, totally. And yes. And again, I feel like, again, that's like a personal choice, whether you choose to get that label or whether you choose not to, because I think it's different for different people. I think for the majority of neurodiverse people, and again, this is just what I see, I'm not an expert, but it's a liberating label, not a disabling label. It's an enabling label, because it all of a sudden gives you an understanding or framework to put yourself within that you didn't have previously. And it's like square peg, round hole stuff. You know, it's like, I've been trying to force myself into a round hole for 40 years. And now I've realized that I'm square. Great. And you go from being a failure at things to being successful in one instant. Because you go from thinking, why can't I enjoy these things that other people enjoy? I'm bad at it, to going, oh, I understand why I don't, and I don't have to do it anymore. Brilliant. You know, like, so it's like that. It literally is that life-changing in that sense. So yeah, it can hold people back, I would say, because you could soon turn it into an excuse if you wanted to.
Yeah. Yeah, and we do see it quite often. Like, I'm not saying that that's exactly the scenario, but
I think it's the same with any label though, isn't it? It's like, I like the idea of a label being abling. I love that phrase. I think it's a really nice way to look at it. But I can see, and maybe it goes deeper into like a personality type more than anything, that people will use that label to go, oh, well, that's who I am. I'm never going to be anything different. And I'm not going to push past anything, when arguably they've got the capability of doing it, but they're using to hide behind that label or just use it more of an excuse. But I do like the idea of abling it, because that episode we did on personality profiles the other week, actually, I loved that, because like for me, I'm like, oh, I can see why I am the way I am now, because it's got a name for it. And I was like, oh, okay, I can lean into that strong D type and go, that is me. And everybody can see it. And I couldn't. And I'm like, oh, that makes sense. I can see it now. So, but I look at that as an enabling thing. And I think the personality type of myself is, I love learning about it even more. So I'm just going to keep going into it, but I'm not going to own myself as that person, because I'll have other factors and variables, and the context changes all the time with loads of different things. So it's, I do think a lot of it is that personality bit as well, and how you're going to perceive that label.
We were talking about this with a friend yesterday, actually, and it was saying the difference is that you can see what you want as a neurodiverse person isn't it isn't like excuses. You just want accommodations in certain situations, and if you have, let's say, a physical disability, you get those accommodations because it's physical, and nobody thinks that's a, everyone thinks that's the norm, right? So if you were sat, we had a really good one we were talking about. So let's say somebody in a wheelchair like ran over somebody by mistake when they were trying to get on a bus, like ran over someone's foot, something like that, right? Like everybody, and the person whose foot got run over, not everyone obviously, but most people would go, oh, that wasn't deliberate, that was an accident, they were trying to get on the bus, it was more difficult for them than it is for me, I shouldn't have been in their way. And they would say, oh, don't worry about it, no problem, and they would probably help the disabled person get on the bus. If somebody who had ADHD then did exactly the same thing, so stepped on that person's foot because their attention had been grabbed by, let's say, something shiny on the right hand side, and their brain had, through no control of their own, because I've seen this with having a long-term relationship with someone that's got ADHD and an ADHD son. They don't have control over this stuff. Like, they get distracted by something and they stand on that person's foot. The ADHD person is wrong. That was their fault, right? Because that disability is not visible. But it's exactly the same situation. They technically made a mistake that upset that other person through no fault of their own. But because it's not a visible thing, it becomes their fault. And that's the difference between having a difference that is not seen and one that is seen. I don't think people who are neurodiverse want to be, I don't know what the right word is, like given more accommodations than anybody else would be, but just understood in that, like in the same way, but that's all it is. So it's not, you don't want an excuse made for you. You still want to do everything that everybody else does, but it's just nice to have people understand.
Yeah, absolutely. So with all of that going on then, how have you found it running a dog training business? Yeah.
So the hardest parts for me are social media. It's got to be one of the hardest parts for me, because everything is literal to me, right? Like, so unless I pre-process it, everything's literal. Like everything that comes out, everything somebody else says to me is I take it 100% literally until I go, oh, it's a physical process for me to have to go, right, they've said that. Did they mean it literally? What were the cues that tells me they did or didn't mean it literally, and then work that through, right? So the trouble with social media is that people, when you're on social media, everything's perceived. Like I perceive it all literally, and there's no nuance to any of it. So it's a very stressful place to be, and I don't want to be on it. Like I'm not interested in. I don't have any interest in sharing what I'm doing. Does that make sense? Whereas I think neurotypical people, they do want to. From my experiences, they want to share. You know, like they share their personal lives and they want people to know about it. And they do. It's not that I care. I'm not bothered. People can know what I'm doing, but it doesn't come naturally at all to me to be open like that. It's just, it's a very performative thing. I have to think about it and do it and like put myself out there and stuff. Whereas, and I think a lot of dog trainers struggle with that. I would say you'll probably know better than me. But like, it's a universal struggle for dog trainers, isn't it? To be like that, to be like out there and sharing stuff, and you know, like so. Yeah, and I think because I believe everything I read literally until I've really thought it through. All those social media comments and like someone puts up something, especially as a dog training world, is that you like someone puts up a reel about something. This is how you train a dog, and to me that's real until I've worked it through. So like you have all this extra processing, and you have to go, oh god, that's not. They didn't mean that like that, and that wasn't. So there's that. I think because of so much of dog training is played out like that now, isn't it? Like, I think the world is played out like that now, but like so much of dog training is like that.
And how have you found that's affected your business then by you not being as present, perhaps?
Yes, maybe. It's one of those things I just constantly struggle to do, and I know when I do get little periods of consistency. I mean, you can even look through my Instagram and see it. Like there are little periods of consistency where I manage it, and then the views start to go up and things start to go on. I'm like, oh, and I get some clients from it, and then it's just such a constant fight. It's not even It's very difficult to even put it into the category of it just being a job and doing it, because it's just such a thing that just doesn't come naturally to me at all.
Does it feel when you do it and it's consistent, does it feel worth the effort that you're putting in for it?
No, that's the trouble. No, it doesn't. I hate it. I just hate doing it. That's the problem. And I'm not bad at it. I mean, you can go and I can do it. I mean, I can go on. I can do like a talking head to camera and be really enthusiastic and look at me and and I'm chatting and I'm articulate and I'm intelligent and I can do it all. I just hate doing it. And I don't know. Maybe that might not even be a neurodiverse thing. That might just be me. But I think it's based in that. It's based in that desire, just not being bothered about the rest of the world in the same way. I'm not fussed about sharing that information. I'm not really interested in other people's information like that either. Like I just don't. It's not that I don't care about people. That's not the right way to put it. I'm just not bothered about what they had for breakfast. You know, like that small talk. It just doesn't interest me. I don't see the point in it. Like I'll talk to you about a dog all day long, but I'm not interested in anything else. Like I just not interested.
Yeah, and you can see how it is difficult, can't you? Because the world that we live in now and the way that consumers buy things, they need to have all this know, like, and trust that we're always banging on about. And they might not necessarily care what you've had for breakfast, but it's a part of that. Oh,
of your life.
You do need to be sharing a bit more, or that's what the consumer buying trends are at the moment. So I can see how that is actually really challenging when we are coming at it from a very literal perspective of like, look, I've got this service. It does this thing. If you want it, it's here. Like, please keep it that simple. I don't want to have to do all of the nurturing stuff and all of that. It's like, just keep it quite literal. And I can see how that can be really challenging.
Yeah, and everything's challenging. You know, the language I use is very direct. The like everything about that sort of stuff it's all very. In fact, that's not even true. The language I would naturally use is very, very direct. The way I would speak is very, very direct. I have to be very careful to not be interpreted wrong, like to say the wrong thing to clients face to face, because you know, like dog training's very emotive, isn't it? You know, like people are very emotionally invested in their dogs. And while I think most neurodiverse people have a greater empathy, like I know I can see it, I can see what's going on, I understand, but I tend to give very direct solutions to it, which is, again, in some places, in like a lot of work type environments, I was in the military for years, that was like one of the most valued things, because nobody got offended in that environment. You just said it and people were like, oh, that's fine. Whereas that isn't like that, like when you're dealing with clients, you've got to be careful. So you're constantly like almost running everything that you're about to say through your head first, going, okay, yeah, that's fine, say that. But it happens so fast, but it's just so tiring. I don't think I'd have been able to be a dog trainer when I was 20. Like, I think I'd have failed really, really quickly.
Okay, so I want to flip this on its head a little bit then. So you saying that has made me think, right, if you were to come onto social media as the real cat, let's say, and without any of these filters and just go for it, what do you think that would, how do you think that would impact you and your business?
I know where you're going with this. It would make it very polarizing. And I know that's not necessarily a bad thing when it comes to business, because you want to, you don't want everybody to like you. So, I mean, yeah, it probably wouldn't be as bad a thing as I think it would be, if that makes sense. And I don't think I am. I think these days I am fairly, like, I'm very honest. I don't lie to my clients, like, I don't hide stuff. I'm very, very truthful about like how I deal with my dogs and the things I can and can't achieve for people. But I think it's just that filter. I think it's just even just working that filter through that you have to do all of the time. Right, somebody at the back of the dog was so yeah. Do you know, I don't even know if I have an answer to that question.
It's a good question to ask yourself.
Question to ask myself, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't even know if I can. That's part of the problem. Part of working through this neurodiversity thing for me personally has been that, like, it's, when you get diagnosed I was 39 when I got diagnosed, right? So you've got to unpick 39 years of trying to be something that you're not, and you've got to go, right, and I literally had to sit down and almost like list out and go, right, is that part of me something that I've created in order to have everybody else accept me, or is it actually me? Like, what here is real and what here is created? And when you've been doing it for that number of years, I still don't know some stuff. Like, I'm like, is that something I've just been doing for so long that I've got used to it? And some of it's better. Like, I'm doing things that are better. I am nicer to people than I was when I was, like, I really was.
I'm just trying to unpick this thought process around it because it sounds exhausting, because it sounds like you've got all these coping strategies around, like, you have to process it in your head and like figure out how it should come out so it sounds like it's received well. But actually, if you could just take all that away and just be you and take that stress away, I'm wondering if the social media thing is maybe a bit of there's a blocker there because of that. I mean, I don't know. This is just a question I'm throwing out. It could be.
I've definitely got a history, like a very well reinforced history of offending people by being myself. So I'm not even understanding why people were offended, like, and saying something and people looking at me like, what, you've just killed their dog or something, and you're like, oh, I just spoke the truth there. That's all I did, was just say the truth. And it's like, everybody around me knows I spoke the truth, but they're all looking at you like, oh, you said the truth.
Yeah. But there are people that would love that. There are people that would absolutely love to hear you talk like that.
There are, and maybe that's just a process that I could continue to go through. And, so it's probably a very individual thing, that. But I think anybody who is undiagnosed for years and years and years and then gets diagnosed is in a similar situation of having spent years and years either just not being liked or having worked out how to assimilate and then having to work out, like, oh, which bits of it, like, what's acceptable and what's not.
Yeah. Society says it's acceptable or it isn't.
Yeah.
It's a shame, isn't it, that We kind of live like this.
Yeah,
sometimes.
so much stuff that's always, you've got to navigate all the time, isn't it? Like even...
No wonder life's so hard.
It is really hard. So much stuff to keep doing. So to kind of close off this episode then, what, if it is advice or pearls of wisdom, let's say, would you say to those dog business owners out there that are feeling that they fit under this neurodiverse umbrella? How can they navigate the running the business of it a little bit easier, or what things have worked well for you from that front?
I think you just have to set your boundaries, and you have to stick to them, because it's very easy to get very, very involved in stuff and not realise, and you don't think you realise that you're burning out. You burn out so much faster than anybody else does. And a lot of the stuff that you have to do, like say, running a dog training business isn't really about dogs, is it? Sadly, because if it was, like we'd all be in a lot easier place. It's about people, and it's about, communicating with people and all that sort of stuff. So, and that's the hard part. And I think, like you say, I have my rule about the number of hours a day that I can do teaching people, because those are 3 hours a day where I'm like, what I say, I've got my like switch flicked of like, here I am, not saying the wrong thing, not doing the wrong thing. See, wrong. This is the thing I hate about it, because I say wrong and it isn't wrong. It's just it shouldn't be wrong. But it is. It still is wrong to society. So I still have to temper myself, So just setting those strict boundaries for yourself and being aware of what you can and can't do, and not feeling like a failure because of it. Like you will feel like a failure because obviously I'm only doing 3 hours of face-to-face work per day. Right. That's all I'm doing, because I know I can't do any more than that for any sustained period of time. And it's very, very easy to feel like a failure because of that. Like my business is never going to get any further because I'm only doing 3 hours per day. And the reality is it isn't. Like if I just did, I can only do so many clients per day. And I could look at that as a total failure, or I could look at that as that's just what I'm doing, and that's accepted. So yeah.
And it's the way that you are looking after yourself and recognizing what you need as a person.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, like just setting those boundaries. And I think, yeah, anyone who's been diagnosed for a long time will probably be a lot better, diagnosed a lot younger. But I think so many of us are late, getting diagnosed later on now, especially women. There's just so much unpicking to do about like all that sort of stuff that you need to be really, really strict on those boundaries and just be, no, I'm not doing it. And not get offended. And really, it's so easy to say, but like try to not be offended when other people take you the wrong way and do things the wrong way, and and just be understanding. And like once you've got a diagnosis, you can have that understanding of other people and try and be understanding of other people. They don't mean it. They just don't understand, and that takes a big weight off.
Yeah. I think this episode is going to be useful for neurodiverse people, but also for, neurotypical people to really see both sides, because this episode has already helped me understand things a lot better. And it's having that, whether it's with other peers or whether it's the relationship you've got with clients, like there are going to be clients that are, neurodiverse. I can never say it. I find it a really hard thing to say. They're going to be neurodiverse in some, cases. So it's recognizing that and working with them and understanding that they might work differently to you as well. So,
and we collect together. We don't even realize we're doing it, but we do collect together. Like loads of my clients are neurodiverse, and you see it in them, and they've seen it in me, I think. And then they sort of tentatively say it, drop it into conversation. And if I know that they're neurodiverse, I will tell them very, very quickly that I am, because you can just see this weight come off them. They're just like at least 60% of my clients, I would say, like I'll drop it in, I'll look at them and I'll go, yeah, 100%. And then I'll very, very quickly just say, oh, and because I'm autistic, and they'll go, you can just
thank God.
All right. But it's like, I don't know what it is. It's just this weird Zen thing where we just like the people that I have those initial phone conversations with, you just know You just get it from somebody in the way that they speak, the way that they do things, and you go, oh yeah, and then it's like, okay, they're my little gang, and they're in my gang, and so I end up obviously booking those clients because I'm in the neurodiverse gang.
I love it.
Yeah, I love it. It's cool. Okay, we've got one more question for you then, Kat. So you listen to our podcast, I believe, and you have a good idea of what we talk about and who we have on. So who do you know, or who do you think would be a really good fit for us to have on the podcast?
I should have known you were going to ask this because
you listen, so you know.
Oh yeah, I haven't listened to all of the episodes, but I've listened to a couple. Well, I think, and I've said this to you personally. I don't know if you've had this person on yet, because I will admit to having not listened to all of the episodes, but I have listened to some of them. I think it would be really cool to have some people who aren't dog trainers, but are like some of these really, really good dog influencers.
Okay, yeah.
So the social media want people who have got like however many hundreds of thousands of followers that just make content to make that just attracts other dog people. Because I always look at their accounts, and again, I think this is maybe just because of neurodiversity. I look at their accounts and I see their stuff and I just think, why has that got thousands of likes? I just don't get it. Why is that? Why do people like that?
Yeah.
So I think like some, people who are able to just intuitively put stuff out there that other people like, and that's their only motivation. They're not trying to sell anything. They're not. I mean, they are sort of. They're sort of selling themselves, aren't they? But their primary motivation is people will like this. It's going to get me lots of likes, and that's what I need in order to, get my next brand deal. Yeah. So it's like those people who are so good at tapping into the dog world psyche. Like that would be really interesting.
So that's a good chat.
Yeah, I like it.
Like what is it that just, because you could then apply that, I think, as a dog trainer, like what is it? Because I can make tutorials and I can do talking heads and I can do all this stuff, but like what is it that people really want to hear? What makes them just go, I like that, that's funny, or that's, especially because so many of us are neurodiverse, and I don't think it comes naturally.
Yeah.
Just have that intuitive thing that everybody likes.
Yeah.
Love it.
Oh. And then very last thing then, what if people are local to you up in Scotland and they want to just find out a little bit more about you, where do they do that? So I am Valley Dogs, because I live in the Tweed Valley. So I'm in Peebles in Scotland, which is just about half an hour or so south of Edinburgh. And they can just find on the website, on social media. So it's valleydogs.uk, or I think I'm at valleydogs.uk. Yeah. Drop me a line through any of the usual means. Lovely, professional at the end.
Brilliant. Oh, thanks ever so much for coming on, Kat. I've really enjoyed that chat today.
Oh, thank you for having me. I don't know if I've no idea whether I've spoken useful things or not.
You have.
You've spoken very useful things.
Yes, very much so.
Good words have come out of your mouth.
Yes, they have. And we love it because you're on the ground, you're doing it, and you're experiencing all the challenges around it, and you're highlighting it all to those like myself who didn't know a lot about it. So no, thank you.
Yeah, it's my experience to say I'm not an expert. Everyone's experience is different. Like you could interview another neurodiverse person and get a totally different interview, I think. So that's the nature of it, I guess.
This is your story, and that's what we wanted to hear.
Yeah.
Oh,
thank you so much.
Kat. See you soon.